Morning all. Let's look at a classic Robert James Fischer game against Mikhail Tal. We've already seen one encounter in 1959. This is another which I haven't previously covered. I intend to use Houdini as the analytical assistant and try and talk about the position and positioning as far as possible. This and other Sicilian defence games can be seen at facebook.com/Sicilian Defence. Okay, so Mikhail Tal was, by the way, on his way, I believe, to challenge Botvinnik, and he successfully did for the World Championship. So he was later to become World Champion after this game. Fischer played e4 and Tal reacted with Sicilian defence. One interesting aspect of this game is as though Fischer was playing like Tal, very sacrificially, very dynamically. So this is a razor sharp encounter which shows actually really creative rook manoeuvres early on to try and shield the black king. And Fischer's, playing very, very incisive, critical moves for a long way through. So, knight f3, d6. You have a normal variation of Sicilian. So knight f6, knight c3, protecting the pawn. Now this a6 waiting move. So if black wants to play e6, it cuts out the bishop b5 lines. Bishop c4 and now e6. And now, without waiting for b5, which is a logical continuation for black in many respects, to put pressure on e4, put a bishop on b7, Fischer actually played bishop b3. Until he played b5 anyway. So black's strategic trump cards here, the semi-open c-file, potential outpost square on c4. So often bishop b7, also knight d7 to c4, trying to get the bishop away from white, because that bishop can be potentially very dangerous on this diagonal when black castles. And often there might be like f4, f5 to amplify the effect of the bishop on that diagonal. In fact, here white did play actually f4, but there's an issue which is raised with this move, a materialism issue about losing the e4 pawn straight away. But black is, without much development here. He's only got the knight developed, and otherwise it's just pawn moves. So this is quite a cheeky kind of move to test white. Tal actually played b4, just aiming to win the centre pawn. But with the centre pawn, there's central control. With central control, you win, the centre of the battlefield. Your pieces can be much more powerful if they can, get the central squares after. So it's not just the pawn; it's a centre pawn. But black's king is still in the centre, and there's a lack of development here. So Fischer actually plays knight a4, and Tal snaps up that pawn, and now Fischer casually just castles, so he's putting his rook behind the f pawn, which means f5 is going to extend the scope of not just the rook but also this bishop on the diagonal. So that would be a natural move. Also it will be blasting that bishop down this diagonal. So f5 is a very thematic move here. Now this next move by Mikhail was trying to discourage it, I guess. It looks as though that's the main purpose, as well as potentially to fianchetto the bishop maybe. But I think the main purpose is to deprive white of this move, because positionally the bishop's actually been hemmed in by the pawn as well, as the rook not being that active at the moment with the pawn on f4. But here it becomes critical, and I'm going to try and combine some technical analysis here, just to explain in detail what's going on. So f5. So positionally, we know, two pieces are getting extended in scope, maybe a third one here on the diagonal. e6 has been undermined, maybe with that d5. The queen's actually a bit tied down to b6, so you can imagine knight b6 to d5 also being useful potentially. Furthermore, there's also this diagonal to consider. There's loose pieces potentially on this diagonal. Now here, the move played was actually g takes f5. Houdini on a loose shallow analysis does like gf5 a bit, but still with advantage to white. There's also e takes and d5 to consider. Let's see if d5 falls actually. d5, something like takes, queen f3, carries with it, the immediate threat of knight e6 and queen f7. So say queen c7, knight takes. Is black getting dismantled in this type of position? It looks as though this was another, just another pawn move, because here it's only the knight which is really developed. Everything else is in the box at the moment in this position. And in fact, bishop e3, and white has, in theory, a huge advantage. b6 is now being outlined as a real weakness. So let's just assume, for example, what could go wrong with bishop g7? Knight b6, and here queen h3, which would mean bishop f4 might be on the cards. But let's just give an example. Actually, queen e6 as well. If the queen tried to defend here, knight c8 would be a killer move. It's all demonstrating really black's lack of development, and there's a lot of pressure on the black position here. So d5 is tempting as a move as well, because it shuts out that bishop. So I think it's worth mentioning a variation there, a crazy line. E takes looks doesn't look as logical, because black really wants that g file maybe to coordinate some pressure on g2. So here, how could white proceed? Maybe bishop d5, and still play a knight sack here to try and tear open some lines. But in this position, it's not just about the queen coming to f7. There's a cheeky idea here of playing actually queen d4, actually winning a rook. These rooks are loose on both sides of the board. They're kind of unprotected on both sides of the board. So if black's actually losing a rook here, first taking on e4, and then choosing which rook. So either is good, but maybe h8 is the stronger one because of bishop h6. So that's not too hot, this continuation basically of playing in response to f5, of playing e takes f5. But so g takes f5. So positionally, it seems this carries with it some ideas of counter-attack, which gives some reason for white to maybe really concerned. But Fischer plays the right move here. His pieces, apart from these guys, this bishop's got squares anyway. But his pieces are good. The black king's, still in the centre. So I hope you're not too surprised by this knight sack, knight takes f5. But let's see what is actually going on. What is the specific refutation of say e takes f5? Is it, for example, queen h5 or queen d5? Now queen d5 looks kind of tasty, because it's not only eyeing f7, it's eyeing that unprotected rook on a8. And in fact, it seems queen d5 is the preferred move here. If queen h5, black could just defend actually. Queen f6, and then what? It's difficult to see how black continues. If knight b6, there'll be queen d4 check, and then snapping off the knight might actually be possible here, because the king can escape like this. Check. Black's got really enough defensive resources here, even if his king's chased to c7. So basically, in this position, it's important to think that queen d5 might actually be the strongest move. Queen d5. So hitting f7 and a8, and it's not the Fischer move. It's not what Fischer played actually. Queen d5. But if bishop e6, then taking on a8, and now bishop g7, queen b7, it's not really that convincing actually, this position, even though it's given us a small advantage for white. So let's look at this again. I know this is a very, very complicated game, but in this position, after G takes F5, knight F5. So if sorry, E takes F5 wasn't even actually played, but we're saying here that Queen D5 might be strong, just picking up the rook, because Queen H5 is easily is more easily defended. So Queen D5, and we follow this through. So White's picking up the rook. All right, let's follow it a bit further. Castles, Bishop F4. Well, White's essentially picked up the exchange, but Black's pieces look good. And if this B pawn's dropping and the Queen's returning, you know, to a central place on E1 even, then Black's going to start to be looking a little bit better, I would imagine. Although Black's pieces look quite centralized here and very, very useful. It's only a 0.58 advantage actually here. So I don't know this. So what that means is basically after this knight takes F5, maybe you know, E takes F5 it is to be considered actually quite seriously. There's other moves as well. Maybe say Queen C7. So say Bishop E3. This looks a lot safer for Black actually. No fireworks needed. This kind of position. If Black can get away with this, so he's snatched that early centre pawn, and there's a blast, you know, furnace of lots of, you know, active pieces for White. But you know, this is actually looking very, very dangerous actually after Queen H5. But if Knight takes B3, getting rid of one of the danger pieces. Unfortunately, like Knight E6, and Black could go splat at any time here. And in fact, this might be it. Black might actually be going splat here. Knight G5. Yes, if Black can't castle, the King's still trapped in the centre, and faced with like huge pressure like Rook E5s and F7. So that could be quite unpleasant actually in that continuation. It's hair-raising stuff, all this, after the Knight takes F5. Tal actually played Rook G8, so let's go into that line. Now, the most clinical move here, according to Houdini, is Bishop D5, and that is actually what Fischer played, Bishop D5. So it's echoing the weakness of A8 and F7 simultaneously, and also E4 is of course attacked. Now, the move Tal played in response was Rook A7, which seems sensible. What if it takes? Let's just vividly demonstrate. Queen takes D5 here. So hitting F7 and A8. So say, all right. Let's say the Rook moves. Check. Actually, Bishop E3. I mean, B6 is also a major problem, as this shows. Rook A E1. The pressure is just huge on Black here. This would be like pretty nasty stuff if this happened. Knight D5. This would be like all over. So that's a pretty technical move, Bishop D5. So Tal's really like I don't know. He's like taking the mickey, winning that centre pawn. There's so much pressure on his position here, which is why, you know, Fischer in his memorable games book he describes this as a very near miss. It sure was, because, you know, Black is really under pressure. Now here Bishop takes E4 was played, which is the right move, just offering that knight still. So, and now the knight's taken. And bishop takes f5, clearing away that f file, exposing f7 as a weakness. Note, both the rooks are still unprotected, they're tactically vulnerable. Knight's ready, always dangerously, to go to b6 as well. But the key thing is also that the king's still in the centre, and Tal remarkably plays this cheeky move, rook e7. So he's shielding his king in a very resourceful way. And here it seems technically a move like c3 is looking good here, because if takes, then the knight's got that fantastic d5 square to come back with, or maybe even just takes and use the b file is also an option. So c3, if it forces a5, then there's also the c file to work with. After takes, then a move like a bishop move and rook c1 might be handy. So a simple move like c3 looks good here, and it's mentioned actually in the Memorable Games book that Fischer didn't need to play anything too wild. He's got an advantage. He just needs to get a little bit more pressure, and c3 and rook f2 to defend g2 if needed would be the way to do this, because there's still dangerous threats on this diagonal. Once that rook's eyeing g2 against Tal, an open road to your king is often big trouble. So bishop takes c8. It's a good move as well. Queen takes c8. But now look, the queen is actually threatening this queen c6, hitting a4 and g2. And here again, a key move would be rook f2, because white doesn't want to play g4. It'll be weakening the light squares, just asking for it later, and also this diagonal might be potentially weak if this knight's ever moved. But so a key move defensively would be rook f2. It would seem here at some point. But this next move is like basically a virtual piece sacrifice from Fischer. Bishop f4, and with it the evaluations just plummeted for black to be about equal now. So this is the tragedy. Maybe this is one of the tragic parts of the game at move 17. If move c3 had been played, so say queen c6, rook f2, c3 is also, pardon me, defending a4 as well. There's another function to it, so it's quite a clever move in many respects, because that a4 knight is slightly vulnerable as well. But in this kind of position, alright, let's assume knight d7, c takes b4, rook e4 to try and double the rooks on g2, or something like that. Now here, if rook g4, knight d5, big knight, blocking the queen from g2, and this would be favouring white. There's the king in the centre is getting exposed, and if white's king safety is not too bad here, let's just throw in f6, then also the c file is potentially dangerous. Once the knight is established on d5, white's really showing a resurgence of pressure here. Okay, so that would be with c3. It's possible that white can really get access to d5 with the knight sort of getting to a much stronger position, or usage of the c file, and requires careful defence with rook f2 if needed, if g2 comes under greater fire. But bishop f4 then was played in the game. So a virtual piece sacrifice, queen c6. It's a chaotic, it's wild tactical game, intensely tactical. So how does Fischer defend this? Well, he defends and counterattacks, and actually, so it does become simply like a piece sack. But he plays queen f3, not really expecting maybe queen takes a4. Now if Tal doesn't take the pawn knight on a4, if he plays queen takes f3, white will be a bit better with rook takes f3 apparently. Knight c6, rook d1. Depends, if this knight can reroute to d5, I can see white increasing the advantage here. At the moment, is that possible? Say knight b6 here, it might be, and knight c4 or knight d5, slight advantage to white. So Tal went for it. He went greedy again. He just took the knight on a4. So what was Fischer's punishment? Why wasn't it good enough? Well, the obvious punishment is to try and strip away this rook, defensive rook, from the king. So bishop takes d6. The rook can't afford to leave. Obviously f7 is needed to be protected. If rook d7, there's going to be something really, really nasty here. Check. Check. Say this move, that would be a mate in 5 with rook e8. Rook takes b8. And if bishop, well, it's just totally over. So the rook can't do that. So actually, Tal comes up with a move, queen c6, to get the queens off. And Fischer took the knight. He was not only attacking the rook, he took the knight, so he's regaining some of his material, it seems. But there's a cheeky check here, unfortunately for Fischer, which gives black quality. So check, regaining the bishop. So black is a bishop up, numerically for only one pawn, with the king still stuck in the centre. Now let's just carefully see what this again in more detail. This bishop takes d6. So if the rook moves, it's going to be a disaster, even if it moved to d7. The bishop's actually attacking the knight. So what if the knight moved, you just take the rook, bishop takes e7, and then f7 is a disaster again. Say knight e5, queen b7. There's no time for this. Check. Check. It's falling to bits. The king in the centre is just a major, major target. Even rook f7 would work now. For kind of winning attack. Okay, so basically, in this position after bishop takes d6, it's critical. So this move, queen c6, is great for recentralizing the queen and getting this queen b6 working to recapture. Okay, so black's got equality here, it seems. Now that's funny. You might ask, well, why isn't black a piece up? So why is Houdini thinking this is equal? There's a straight Houdini line at 0-0 here. Rook a e1. See, the immediate threat is queen f7. I think this is what Fischer was mentioning also in his notes. Fischer and Tal, I think they both thought initially black would be busted after this rook a e1. And you might wonder, well, what if, so say rook takes e1, check. Now here, just rook takes e1 threatens rook e8, mate. So bishop d6, it's all falling like a pack of cards again, the black position. That's unacceptable, that's totally lost. So rook a1 is really the critical test. Now if this crawling move, which Fischer had mentioned in his notes, and it looks to be just potentially equal, because how is white getting out of this with the king in the centre and that bishop now a tactical vulnerability? This kind of position with rook takes f7. So numerically now, white would be 2 pawns for the piece, but there's a lot of checks potentially. So check, check, check. And the checks could actually perpetuate. If king e7 to try and escape, then queen takes b8. Queen hasn't got enough time to deliver mate. The rook's eyeing on at the moment. So that might end up in a draw, that kind of continuation. So this was the right move, I think. Anyway, so rook a e1. If Fischer wanted to try and draw now, rook a e1 introduces the threat of queen takes f7. Check. But in the game, actually, queen c6 check was played, and now it seems miraculously Tal's crawling out. He plays rook d7. After check, he plays bishop e7, and the bishop isn't as vulnerable in this configuration, it seems. If queen f6, That looks fairly dangerous, for example. How does black defend this? Let's look at one defence, rook f8. That might be sufficient, actually, because queen b7 here. And black's living another day. So the worst is over here, it seems, for black, if he can just cling on with only moves. So rook takes f7 arrived here, though, picking up the rook, so picking up a pawn, basically. But it's drifting into this ending, which is just going to be a piece down. Here, rook f1, unfortunately, it's not winning for white, because king g7, and there's no mates or anything here. Because the queen's eyeing e5, there's no queen e5. Here, rook d8 is also exposing the back row, so there's no time to kind of win material. This would be pretty bad for white. So Fischer has to take the rook, and it's starting to get a bit miserable. A piece down, literally just a piece down now. Unbelievably, his attacks vaporized. It was the young Fischer in 1959, and I mean, he lost 4 times to Tal, and Tal cheekily was going on about signing the score sheet with not just Tal's name but Fischer's name, because he had beaten him so many times. But this was going to change in later years. But anyway, there's still a big game at move 27 now to look at, believe it or not. So queen b7. Can Fischer still try and draw this? Rook g6. Now c3. If he can get rid of a few pawns and get some inroads into the king, can he not generate enough to try and draw? Check. Queen c4. Now this bishop d8 points potentially at the white king with bishop c7. So the worst is over. The central control. Look at that central control of the battlefield. You know, as long as black has good central control now, it's starting to be a lot easier. So maybe preempting bishop c7, g3 was played, but it weakens the other diagonal now, and it allows the exchange of queens. So what else is there if there wasn't g3? It's starting to look a bit miserable. So say queen e2. Maybe bishop c7 is inappropriate now because of queen e7. Even so, this is still better for black. So it's not too hot. So the queens came off, and Tal clings onto his queenside pawn with rook b6. So after king g2, now he brings the king in to the centre. Check. And white's under pressure now. His queenside's under pressure. He doesn't really want to play a move like b3. It's giving this nice outpost pegging on c3 with this supported pawn. So he protects the pawn actually for the moment. Or is there anything even more critical after b3? Let's just check that. Actually, bishop c3 doesn't even need to be played. Just something like rook b7. Swing the rook maybe to the centre. Okay, it's a piece up at the moment. It's not good. It's not good. So rook f6. Now the threats are starting to emerge, like checks and king going even further into the position. So can Tal get in king e4 where it stopped? Bishop d4. Now again renewing the threat of rook f3 check in lines. But yeah, this move a3. It's difficult to suggest white's going downhill really. It's looking fairly miserable. So a3 b3. Fischer played rook c8, and now bishop takes b2. So is this clever for white to try and at least get that b3 pawn or something? Check. Trying to grab the b3 pawn, but then follows now check. And now rook c3 check, which is nasty. Going into the discover from the bishop, potentially, or blocking in his own rook. Fischer's own rook we blocked. King c7, so that pawn's not going anywhere for the moment. Bishop a1, so the pawn's actually going to queen now. b2 and b1 is on the cards. And now the last horrible move inflicted on Fischer here is b2, leaving the rook and pre temporarily because there'll be the discovered check with the queening. So here Fischer's busted. There's nothing. Just to show you that if takes, then there's check, queen with check from the bishop, discovered check. So that was basically it. If king a5, then rook c1's queening, picking up the rook. So quite an intense game. Please excuse the variations. It was just, I felt needed to try and get to the bottom of things here in a concrete manner. But let's have a look at again. It's a really ultra sharp skirmish, so much sharper than the other 1959 game, with amazingly resourceful rook maneuvers from Mikhail Tal, and kind of cheekiness about the game, just to try and win that centre pawn and then hope for the best. I mean, would you like to play this position as black with potential for really extending the scope of many of the pieces, and there's many targets in the position here tactically, loose pieces potentially once even more files and diagonals are opened up. So g6, everything's like set on fire here after knight takes f5. How can white get any more aggressive with his pieces? So rook g8, so bishop d5. It's just exposing tactical vulnerabilities. So rook a7, now taking on e4, taking on f5. So here, white's just better. Three minor pieces each, in fact. Material is in this position equal. Black's got this like g-file pressure and an extra pawn more in the centre than white's pawns. This knight's slightly displaced on a4, a bit of a target. So really the main issues, objectively looking at this again, would be to try and soak up the g-file pressure and to re-centralise the knight, ideally to d5 somehow. I think those are the two main issues, and it looks as though they could have been addressed with a key idea of c3 coming up. So c3, if white, it's also defending the knight with the queen. If rook f2, let's just check this. Is there any other alternatives like b3? That might actually be an alternative as well. But then bishop g7, bishop b2. This would still be all right for white as well. This position, because if this knight can just reroute back into the game, it would be a victory. But c3 would be even better here, because it's putting pressure on b4, and if a5 takes bishop f4, then white would also be getting on the c file. So that would really kind of work with that knight sitting on a4 to play c3. But unfortunately, this bishop f4. So the two issues are combined now: the knight on a4 and the g-file pressure to win a piece. And it looks as though it's still really dangerous for black. And both players actually thought black was going to get busted now, if initially anyway, in this position after recollecting the piece here. This simple move rook a1 looked frighteningly strong because of the threat of queen takes f7 because of the pin on the rook. If king d8's not played, then I think other moves are potential disasters, like check. Just just giving up the queen's mate in 2. So king d8 is like very good move. But maybe even actually Houdini's indicating king d7 might actually do the trick as well for saving black. So here, look, there's always a discovered attack on the queen, so there isn't enough time for rook d1. So anyway, so in the game, check was played, and it seems miraculously Tal's wriggling out just a piece up. It's cheeky stuff. It's drifting towards this endgame where Tal's just the bishop up, basically, and he's just starting to make inroads with his pieces now after the queen's come off. So well, g3 also, you might say, well, let's just check this just once more, because it seems to invite the exchange of queens. Couldn't White have just kept the queens on, you might ask? So let's look at this again just briefly. Queen e2, if bishop c7, that's reasonable, but stronger moves like queen d4 apparently. So just keeping an eye on e7 with the bishop. And what does it introduce? Say White does a3 takes rook f6. So the idea of queen d4, powerful centralization. It supports potentially rook f2s, for example rook d1, maybe even rook f2 here. And it's also guarding g4. So queen d4 is one of those powerful central looking moves with huge tactical implications. So but anyway, so Fischer, he was wary of that, I guess. So g3, yeah, just the exchange of queens, and it starts as rift. It's just a piece down, unfortunately. But it's such such a violent encounter early on in this game, I feel. So b2, and then that was the final move. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out facebook.com/Sicilian Defence for other Sicilian videos. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.